she landed without clearance. One woman in a sleek, silver jet, sending an entire Air Force base into a panic. But when the canopy opened and her boots hit the tarmac, the silence was louder than any siren. Commander Eliza Hart had returned. No rank, no orders, just quiet authority and a mission no one saw coming. Welcome to my channel. You could feel the tension ripple across the tarmac like static. Some hotshot was making an unauthorized approach on runway 14, and from the sound of the tower chatter, nobody had any clue who she thought she was. The order came in sharp: get ground crew to runway 14. Now, private aircraft approaching restricted airspace with no clearance. Intercept immediately. I was in the hangar at Ellsworth Field, just outside Bozeman, Montana. Clear blue skies stretched from the Absarokas to the crazy mountains, and the air had that crisp high-altitude bite that only comes with early spring. It should have been a quiet day. Training flights. Maybe a local flyover for the high school's aviation program. Instead, everyone was scrambling. A white and silver L-39 Albatros was descending in textbook formation. No escort. No clearance. The tower was barking at her to divert. She didn't. We heard her voice for the first time, calm as a pond on a windless day. This is November 9th to 2nd Echo Charlie. Requesting temporary landing on runway 14. I have business with Base Command. I glanced at Chief Rudd, our ground lead. He was muttering under his breath, something about civilians with too much money and too little sense. The lieutenant standing next to him, new kid named Randall, barely out of ROTC, puffed his chest and barked, "We'll block her in and escort her to civilian lot Delta. Let her cool off in her Gulfstream." But then old Sergeant Buckley, who'd been at this base since before I even thought about enlisting, squinted through his binoculars and said something that made everyone pause. "Wait a second, that tail number looks familiar." Lieutenant Randall rolled his eyes. "Sergeant, with all due respect, let's not go chasing ghosts. She's probably some influencer trying to film a documentary." But when the aircraft touched down and taxied to a clean stop, dead center, right on the yellow, the base fell so quiet you could have heard the prop wash settle. No one said a word, because when the canopy opened and the pilot climbed down, we recognized her. She didn't wear rank. She didn't have security detail. But she didn't need any of that. It was Commander Eliza Hart. The Eliza Hart. She walked like the runway still belonged to her. Like every rivet in every hangar whispered her name when the wind blew right. And in a way, maybe they did. Eliza Hart was 45 now, though she didn't look it. She had that lean, sun-sculpted poise of someone who'd spent most of her life in flight suits, not offices. Her presence hit harder than any thunderclap. She'd commanded this base 12 years ago, the youngest woman to do so in Pacific Air Command history, and had designed half the current defense readiness drills still in place today. Then, 3 years ago, she vanished from active duty. Medical retirement. No press. No farewell tour. One day she was here. The next she was just a name on a plaque in the officers' hall. But legends don't retire. They just change airspeed. And here she was. No brass. No announcement. Just a quiet return. And an L-39 that landed like she never left. The tower was scrambling. Nobody below command level Alpha had any idea she was coming. A few of the newer guys still thought this was some high-level stunt, until the master sergeant in the control tower dropped his coffee mug at the sound of her voice and muttered, "Oh hell, that's Hart. Stand down, everyone." But the orders were already halfway down the chain, and the young lieutenant, Randall, hadn't gotten the memo yet. He was still telling ground crew to prepare for a forced diversion when Buckley grabbed his arm. "Son," he said, low and slow, "you're about 5 seconds away from asking a hurricane why it's blowing." I stepped onto the edge of the tarmac, just behind Buckley. The air was still, too still, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Commander Hart stood beside her Albatros, helmet tucked under one arm, her other hand casually adjusting her flight jacket. She didn't speak, didn't move toward us. She didn't have to. This was her runway. She was letting us catch up. Lieutenant Randall finally stopped shouting into his radio. His voice cracked when he asked, "Buckley, is that really her?" Buckley didn't answer. He just walked forward and snapped off the kind of salute I hadn't seen since our last change of command ceremony. Hart returned it, crisp and sharp. "At ease, Sergeant. Good to see someone still knows how to land a salute." I swear, You could feel the temperature drop 10 degrees as the realization washed over everyone. This wasn't some rogue civilian. This was the architect of half the protocols we were following. The woman whose call sign still hung in the training center like scripture. Echo Charlie 1. Never lost a bird. Never left a man. Randall swallowed hard. Commander Hart. I didn't know. She cut him off with a soft smile, the kind that didn't carry malice, only memory. Lieutenant, you did your job. Protocol says unregistered aircraft gets intercepted. You followed it to the letter. That's exactly what I trained my officers to do. Behind her, the ground crew stood frozen. Then, one by one, the older techs and NCOs began to stir and salute. No orders, just instinct. She was one of ours. Always had been. I took a step closer, offering her a bottle of water I'd grabbed from the cart. She nodded once, took it, and cracked it open with hands that didn't shake. Not one bit. Heard you were in Nevada, Buckley said, voice low. Off-grid. Hart smirked. I was. Desert air does wonders for old scar tissue. Then her gaze turned toward the control tower, like she could see right through it. I was invited here for the air show. Thought I'd show up quietly. Didn't expect to spark a DEFCON shuffle. Randall was still trying to process everything. Why didn't you come through official channels? She looked at him with something between amusement and gravity. Because official channels forget what makes a commander. Sometimes, I want to know what the next generation does when someone unexpected lands on their radar. Buckley let out a low whistle. You ran a readiness drill on us? Hart shrugged, sipping the water. No better way to measure the health of a base than to see how it handles uncertainty. That was when Colonel Bennett arrived. Boots hitting concrete hard. Hat under one arm. 2 stars glinting on his collar. But a tension in his jaw that told me he knew he was walking into something bigger than him. He didn't say much. Just approached and saluted. And Hart. She held his eyes, then returned it. Ma'am, Bennett said, if we'd known you were inbound, you'd have rolled out a red carpet I didn't need, she interrupted gently. I prefer the honesty of a runway without applause. He nodded once. We've notified higher command. You'll be getting a call. I'm sure I will, she said. I watched it all, barely breathing. The control tower, the young airmen on the flight line, the veteran crew chiefs, all of them now watching in respectful silence. Then Hart turned to Randall. Lieutenant. He straightened. Yes, ma'am. Next time Buckley tells you a tail number looks familiar, take his word for it. He nodded, cheeks burning. Yes, ma'am. And then she smiled, not smug, not condescending, just proud. You handled it like an officer. Don't forget that. Colonel Bennett motioned for Hart to follow him toward the command building, but she shook her head. Not yet. I want to walk the tarmac. Nobody questioned it. She turned away from the parked Albatros and began moving down runway 14 with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. I fell and stepped a few paces behind her, Buckley on the other side. The lieutenant stayed back, maybe trying to shrink into his uniform. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. She walked like she was reading invisible marks on the ground, scars the rest of us couldn't see. At one point she paused and looked up at Hangar 3, the one they'd renamed after some general last year. I could see the corner of her mouth twitch. Not a smile, not a frown, just a memory rising. You know what happened right there? She asked. Neither Buckley nor I answered. That's where Lieutenant Miles' jet caught fire. April 09. He was 30 seconds from bailing, but the ground team kept calm. Nobody panicked. They flooded the intake with foam, yanked him out before the bird exploded. She pointed at the exact spot. Her finger hung in the air like it was still waiting for the smoke to clear. I watched that from the tower. Best emergency response I've ever seen on a base. I wrote those NCOs up for medals. Don't know if they ever got them. They did, Buckley said. Still hangs in the break room. Right next to your photo. That made her pause. Just for a second. Then she nodded once and kept walking. We rounded the corner near the fueling station when the speakers on the base crackled to life. Attention all personnel. Commander Eliza Hart, former base commander, is visiting the installation. All units, maintain standard readiness. Full honors to be extended. I swear the base shifted on its axis. A group of airmen near the fuel truck snapped to attention. Others coming out of the mess hall froze, doing double takes. Then came the salutes, slow, uncertain at first, like they were making sure it wasn't some training exercise. It wasn't. The air was changing. You could feel it. like gravity bending around something old and powerful. Bennett jogged up to us, tablet in hand. "Commander, you've set off quite the response. Pentagon's asking for clarification. NORAD wants to know if this is an impromptu inspection. We've got calls from 4 different flag officers." Hart tilted her head, half amused. "I'm retired, Colonel. I don't carry a clipboard anymore." Bennett's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am. But that tail number, that call sign, Echo Charlie 1, it's flagged on every high-clearance channel. And you know why?" She didn't respond. He sighed. "They think you're here for a reason. They think this visit means something." Hart finally turned to face him squarely. "It does. I came to see if the heartbeat of this base still feels right. I came to see if the young officers are still making the right calls without waiting for someone to tell them how." I watched Bennett process that, then slowly nod. "And?" he asked. She looked toward the young lieutenant in the distance, still standing awkwardly beside the Albatros, then back toward the sea of saluting airmen now quietly forming around her. "So far, I like what I see." Just then, an older figure emerged from one of the hangars, stooped a little, silver hair under a faded cap. When he saw her, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes went wide. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "Echo Charlie's back." Hart smiled, the first real one I'd seen. She walked straight to him. "Chief Warrant Harlan," she said, extending her hand. "You still running the maintenance line?" He laughed. "Only part-time. They say I'm too old to climb wing ladders." Told him I'd stop when the bolts started talking back. "They ever do?" "Every day." The two embraced briefly. No speeches, just mutual respect sealed by time and turbine grease. Then the whispers began spreading across the base. Not rumors, not gossip, just reverent awe. "That's her. That's Echo Charlie 1. She's real." And like that, the woman who'd once taught us how to lead without noise had returned, not with fanfare or fireworks, but with the weight of quiet authority. And it was enough. By mid-afternoon, Ellsworth Field didn't feel like the same place. Word had traveled faster than any formal memo ever could. Pilots from hangar bays, logistics techs from the comms trailer, even drone operators from the restricted sector started drifting toward the tarmac. Not ordered, just drawn in. Like something important was happening and none of them wanted to miss it. Commander Hart moved among them without ceremony. No entourage, no clipboard, just the quiet gravity of someone who had once shaped every corner of this base with her decisions and expectations. I watched a young airman, couldn't have been more than 20, hesitate before stepping forward, eyes wide. "Ma'am, were you really the one who flew the Sand Ridge run without an escort?" Hart looked at him, puzzled for a moment. Then something clicked. "Sand Ridge, huh? You mean the night of the blackout, 2013? He nodded eagerly. She smiled. "We lost all radar visibility during a blizzard. I was flying solo recon in AT-38. They said I shouldn't launch. I said they'd thank me later." The kid blinked. "They teach that flight in command school now. It's part of the crisis response module." Hart's smile didn't fade, but her voice softened. "They teach the flight, or do they teach the decision?" Both, I think." She leaned down slightly, just enough to look him straight in the eyes. "Make sure they teach the fear too. That's the part that keeps you honest." And just like that, the kid walked away standing a little straighter. Lieutenant Randall, to his credit, had stuck around. Probably figured he had to see this through. Or maybe he just wanted to understand what had actually happened earlier that day. I found him standing beside the refueling rig, watching Hart talk with a group of crew chiefs. "Underscore, sir?" I asked. He didn't turn his head. She was the first name I ever saw in a leadership case study, and I almost had her towed off the runway. I chuckled. To be fair, so did we. That's how she wanted it. He finally turned to me. His eyes were clearer now. Not embarrassed anymore, just thoughtful. "It was like watching history step off a page," he said. Just then, Colonel Bennett approached from across the tarmac, tablet in hand again. He looked tired, like he'd just gotten off a phone call with someone whose voice came with a Pentagon seal. "Commander," he said as he reached her, "HQ wants to know if you'll debrief with Joint Ops tomorrow. They're calling it an informal advisory session." Hart raised an eyebrow. Informal sounds like a trap. Bennett allowed himself a rare smile. They don't know what else to call it when a legend shows up unannounced. She nodded, then looked around, at the airmen now standing in small clusters, watching her with a blend of curiosity and reverence. At the flight line that once pulsed under her command. at the horizon where her albatross still gleamed under a soft Montana sun. "Tell them I'll meet them halfway," she said. "But I want something in return." Bennett stiffened slightly. "Anything within reason, ma'am." She pointed at Lieutenant Randall. "I want him assigned as my liaison. Starting today." The lieutenant blinked. "Wait, what?" Hart turned to him. "You followed every protocol this morning, even when you weren't sure. That tells me two things. You respect structure, and you've never been forced to question it yet. That means you're ready to learn what command really is." Randall stammered. "Ma'am, I don't know if I—" "That's exactly why you're the right choice," she said, already walking away. The colonel gave the young man a tight-lipped smile and clapped him on the shoulder. "Congratulations, Lieutenant. You've just been handpicked by the woman who wrote your handbook." The sun had dipped just far enough past the towers to cast long shadows across Runway 14, the kind that make even the most familiar base feel like something ancient and cinematic. Commander Hart didn't slow. She made her way toward the maintenance bay, Lieutenant Randall now trailing behind her with a clipboard someone had thrust into his hands like a life preserver. The kid looked stunned, not in a bad way, but in the way someone looks after they realize the next step in their life just showed up wearing aviator sunglasses and knew their name. I caught up to them just as they reached the hangar, where a few of the older techs were already gathered, pretending to check tools but clearly waiting for her. "Ma'am," one said, "you really flying that albatross solo across state lines?" Hart shrugged. "Flew her here from Reno. Couple bumps over the Tetons. Nothing she couldn't handle." "Still got the analog panel?" another tech asked, eyes narrowing. "Every dial. Every hiss of pressure and rattle of trim. She's a songbook in aluminum." One of the crew chiefs leaned in, voice hushed. "Heard your tail number, sent a scramble alert to the defense net. That true?" She looked at him and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't confirm or deny, just left space for stories to grow. "Let's just say some systems still know how to recognize legacy call signs, even if the operators don't." That's when Colonel Bennett reappeared, flanked by a civilian in a pale gray suit. Not Air Force. Not military, either. Probably Joint Intelligence. The kind of guy who walks like he's used to never being questioned, and definitely doesn't like surprises. He didn't offer a handshake, just nodded at Hart. "Commander, I'm here on behalf of Strategic Analysis Group Delta. We've been reviewing your flight path, and we have questions." Hart tilted her head slightly. "Then ask them." The man opened a tablet. "You flew through Echo Range Air Corridor, Class R2, which is still tagged as highly sensitive. You bypassed all FAA civilian routing. Your transponder ID flagged 3 air defense grids. The only reason you weren't intercepted sooner is that your tail code was whitelisted on a defunct clearance list from 11 years ago." Hart didn't blink. "That list was written in my office. I trust my own paperwork." The man's eyes narrowed. "Why return now? Why the unannounced approach?" She turned fully toward him. "Because I wanted to see what would happen when someone who wasn't in the system anymore showed up on the radar. I wanted to see if the base still had people who followed the rules even when they didn't have a name to attach them to." He looked to Colonel Bennett, but the colonel said nothing. Just waited, arms crossed. The suit tapped the screen. "There are protocols." "There are," Hart agreed. "I designed half of them, but they were built for a world that changed faster than we admitted. I wanted to see if they still hold up. Turns out they do." He didn't answer, just pursed his lips and looked down at his tablet. She took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel heavy. "Let me be clear. I'm not here to disrupt anything. I'm here to offer something. Experience. Perspective. The kind that doesn't fit into briefings or simulations." Finally, he closed the tablet. "Very well," he said. "Unofficially, you've been approved to continue your advisory work. But next time, Commander Hart, use the front door." Hart smiled again. "I've spent most of my career using side doors. They tend to be quieter." As the suit walked away, Bennett turned to her, arms still folded. "You're not just here for the air show, are you?" She didn't answer, just watched the albatross shimmer beneath the hangar lights. Then, finally, "Let's just say I have a feeling Ellsworth's going to be important again, and I want to make sure the right people are ready." Bennett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We're glad you're here." That night, under the vaulted curve of Hangar 3, she inspected her aircraft alongside Lieutenant Randall, who now stood clipboard-less, jacket sleeves rolled, nervously trying not to miss a detail, as she ran her hand along the wing edge. "You know," she said, "when I first got this bird, nobody thought she'd fly again." Randall glanced at the polished fuselage. "She looks perfect now." Hart shook her head gently. "She's not perfect. She's honest. Every scratch, every patch, it tells the story. Perfection hides. This teaches." He nodded slowly. "That's how you see people, too, isn't it?" She smiled at him. "You're learning already." The next morning, Ellsworth Field was humming. You know that sound a bass makes when everything's running right? It's not noise, it's music. Clipboards snapping shut, jet engines cycling power-ups, boots on concrete in steady rhythm. It was the kind of readiness that only shows up when people believe their actions matter. And believe me, after yesterday, everyone suddenly felt like they were part of something bigger. Lieutenant Randall met me on the flight line, looking like he'd aged a year in 24 hours, in the best possible way. "Sir," he said, falling into step with me as we walked the perimeter. "Commander Hart asked me to gather incident readiness reports from the past 6 months. Cross-reference them with interception protocol drills." I raised an eyebrow. "You pulling a surprise inspection?" "No," he said, almost grinning. "She is. I'm just trying to stay ahead of her." We reached the mission briefing room, where Hart was already seated at the head of the long oak table. Not at the edge, like a visitor. At the head, like she'd never left. Her flight jacket was draped over the back of the chair. In front of her, a legal pad, half filled with notes in that tight, slanted handwriting officers either learn or fake. She glanced up when we entered. "Morning, gentlemen," she said. "Have a seat." Randall handed over the reports. She didn't open them right away. Instead, she looked at both of us like a commander reviewing a squad. "Lieutenant," she began, "you're 2 years into your commission. You followed every protocol in response to an unidentified aircraft, even when your gut told you something didn't add up. That was the right call. But let me ask you this. What would you have done if I hadn't been me?" Randall swallowed. "Ma'am, I think I would have followed through. Called security, had the aircraft impounded." She nodded slowly. "That's what the book says. But what if the person flying that plane had information that could have saved lives? What if a delay caused by your actions compromised a mission?" He hesitated. "I'd hope I had the judgment to adapt, to ask the right questions." "That," she said, tapping the table with her knuckle, "is the difference between obedience and leadership. One follows rules. The other knows when the rules need context." Randall looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, his voice was steadier. "I want to learn that, ma'am. I want to know when it's okay to trust instinct over policy." "You just took your first step," she said. Colonel Bennett entered then, with Captain Ames in tow, our current readiness officer. Ames had served under Hart back in 15, and the way he stiffened when he saw her said everything. Not fear, just respect wrapped in muscle memory. "Commander," Ames said, "we've got drills scheduled for 1400. You're welcome to observe." She smiled. "Observation is fine, but I'd like to inject a variable, if you don't mind." Ames blinked. "Ma'am." Hart leaned back in her chair. "At 1345, I want one of our civilian contractors to attempt to enter the base perimeter under controlled simulation. No ID badge. No uniform. I want to see how the gate team handles it. No warning, no prep." Bennett frowned slightly. "You're testing our security?" "I'm testing their instincts," she said. "We have all the systems. But the best defense we've ever had has always been a watchful set of eyes." He gave her a slow nod. "You'll get your simulation." Sure enough, at exactly 1345, a base maintenance van with neutral plates rolled toward Gate 3. Inside sat Roy Beringer, one of our longtime contractors who spent more time fixing flight line sensors than at home, by his own admission. Today, he wore jeans, a flannel, and a Montana ball cap. No badge. The guards at the checkpoint stiffened the second he stopped. One of them, Airman First Class Delaney, fresh out of tech school, tapped the window. "Sir, you'll need to present credentials immediately." Roy smiled like the sweet grandpa he was. Left them in the other truck. They know me in ops." Delaney didn't budge. "Sir, step out of the vehicle, please. Hands visible. Base Regulation 246 prohibits entry without identification, regardless of prior familiarity." From the command center, we watched it play out on camera. Hart stood behind the monitors, arms crossed, not saying a word. The other guard radioed it in. "No panic. No ego. Just by the book calm. Within 90 seconds, base security arrived, and Roy was politely escorted to the waiting area while verification took place. After the drill wrapped, Hart turned to Bennett. "Your people are sharp," she said. "No assumptions. No shortcuts. That's the kind of culture that outlasts any one commander." She meant it. You could hear it in her voice. Later that day, I caught Randall standing outside Hangar 5, staring at the L-39 Albatros, now gleaming after a full base detail. He turned as I approached. "I don't know if I'm supposed to be intimidated," he said, "or inspired." I smiled. "You'll feel both, son, but only one of those keeps you moving forward." He looked back at the aircraft. "You ever think about what it means when someone like her shows up again?" "All the time," I said, "because when Eliza Hart came back to Ellsworth, she didn't just test our systems. She reminded us of the weight behind the words Air Force Ready." By the third day of Hart's visit, Ellsworth wasn't just alert, it was alive. You couldn't walk a hallway without hearing someone mention Echo Charlie. It wasn't hero worship. It was curiosity, reverence. Like everyone wanted to understand what made this woman tick, and how to carry some of it forward. In the briefing room, Randall sat beside her now. Not behind, not scribbling notes. He'd earned his place. "Commander," he asked quietly, "how do you know when to speak up, when to challenge orders?" She didn't answer right away. "Then, you wait until silence feels like betrayal. That's when you speak." He nodded, scribbling that down. I did too, in my head. Over in Ops, Colonel Bennett was coordinating a new training initiative, Hart's idea. Peer-led scenario drills, no ranks, no scripts. The goal was to teach adaptability under pressure. She called it learning in the gray. I watched her lead the first one. No PowerPoint, just a whiteboard and a question. "Your radar's jammed. Your wingman's down. You've got one shot to make the right call. What do you do?" The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then they began answering, not to impress, but to understand. Later that afternoon, she walked the line again. Not for show, just to see the people. She stopped by a repair pit, knelt beside a young crew chief, and helped tighten a fastener on an intake panel. No announcement. No cameras. "Ma'am," the tech stammered, "you don't have to." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm doing it." The lesson was simple. Real leaders don't wait for podiums. They show up where the mission lives, right in the dirt. The next morning, Randall was waiting outside the command building, notepad in hand, eyes clear. He wasn't a nervous lieutenant anymore. You could see it. Something had settled in him. "Commander Hart asked me to prep the flight manifest," he said, walking beside me. "She's taking the Albatros out one last time before she heads back." By the time we reached the hangar, the crew was already in motion. The L-39 sat gleaming, canopy open, refueled, and inspected down to the last bolt. A group of airmen stood nearby, waiting, not because they were told to, because they wanted to. Hart approached with her helmet under one arm. When she stopped beside Randall, she handed him a folded paper. "My after-action notes on yesterday's simulation," she said. "You're to submit them to base command. It's your assessment now, Lieutenant." He blinked. "Ma'am." She nodded. "You were there. You understand what matters. You've got the voice for it." Randall looked down at the paper like it weighed 50 pounds. I saw him stand up just a little straighter. Then she climbed into the cockpit, adjusted her straps, and pulled the canopy down with practiced grace. The tower cleared her with a voice that almost cracked over the radio. "Echo Charlie 1, cleared for departure, runway 18. The roar of her takeoff wasn't loud. It was clean, confident, like she never left. As the jet lifted into the sky, a quiet fell over the crew watching below. Not silence, respect. The kind that follows someone who didn't come back to be remembered. She came back to remind us how to lead. 2 days after Hart's departure, the base felt different, but not in the way you'd expect. There were no new posters, no big announcements. Just small changes. Quieter briefings. Sharper drills. Officers double-checking protocols not out of fear, but pride. Randall stopped by my office holding a folder. "It's done," he said. Submitted the report. Base commands implementing her scenario structure permanently. I glanced through the contents. Clean, direct, insightful. It didn't just reflect Hart's thinking. It reflected his growth. Later, out by the rec hall, Sergeant Clay, one of the oldest NCOs on base, caught me off guard. "You know," he said, sipping coffee, "we didn't salute her because of the stars she never wore. We saluted her because every one of us felt seen when she walked by. I nodded. That was the truth of it. At sunset, a package arrived in Randall's name. Inside, a small patch, dark blue, a silver falcon, and stitched in tight thread, "Learn in the gray." No note. Didn't need one. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived from Hart. Not an email. A real, paper letter, signed in ink. It was addressed to the base as a whole, but Randall read it aloud during morning formation. To Ellsworth Air Base. I came to test your protocols. I left reminded of your heart. You are more than your procedures. You are more than your equipment. You are people with instincts, judgment, and courage. Don't ever lose that. The runway doesn't define the base. You do. And when it matters most, I know you'll rise, quietly, confidently, as you did when you thought I was no one at all. Commander E.C. Hart read. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the silence afterward said everything. That same day, Randall was formally appointed as Assistant Operations Officer, not just because of what Hart saw in him, but because of how he responded after she left. In his first staff meeting, he said only one thing: let's keep earning the runway. Later that night, I walked the length of runway 18 alone. The wind was soft, carrying just the faintest echo of jet engines and quiet lessons. Commander Hart was gone, but somehow, she was everywhere. Not in plaques or banners. In decisions. In silence. In the steady hum of a base that knew exactly what it stood for. Because when a true commander steps onto a runway, they don't just land. They leave it stronger than they found it.